Okay, good evening and thank you for coming to this talk. This is not going to be quite a cutting-edge talk as the one before, but I hope it will be of some practical significance to you. So first of all, how did this talk come about? I'm going to talk about SBT plugins and how to write one. So how did this talk come about? Basically, it came about out of a conscious effort to find out some perhaps underexplored topics that they don't get talked much about, but we all use it. So we all use SBT, I think. We all use plenty of SBT plugins for pretty much anything, from publishing, deploying, code analysis, and you name it. So, but if you're anything like me, I never thought of SBT as a very sexy topic. It's not something that I have had a huge motivation to look into beyond my immediate needs, and I was only too happy to delegate to others if others were there to set up more complex builds for me. So being conscious of these things, we decided to go for something a little bit perhaps less glitzy, but certainly useful, and in the process I'm now feeling quite a bit more confident about SBT. So as an initial disclaimer, I'm not an expert on SBT. It's just something that I decided, I won't attempt to dress myself up as an expert on SBT. It's just something that I've decided to look into, how to write an SBT plugin, and try to present it in an inoffensive way. So, and to be honest, I think that a lot of the best or more useful blogs or tutorials are those from people who are just learning something and sharing the learning experience. So I hope that that'll be the case as well. So making a plugin is really not that terribly difficult. It's certainly not rocket science, and any motivated person wanting to look into how to do it can learn it. This is not going to be a presentation that breaks some huge barrier. But so what exactly is the talk? The point of this talk then? It would be, if I had to say anything, if any of you ever wished they were able to but felt disinclined to look into it, I'm going to do the work for you, and hopefully at the end of this talk, if the day ever came they want to write one, you won't be scared. So after parading my own ignorance, let's move on. So this is just scratching the surface. SBT is a pretty large subject, and actually documentation available online is quite good. So you'll probably find the answer that you want there if you're trying to do anything more complex. And as another disclaimer, I'm going to do some live coding in this talk, and as you know, during live coding, nothing ever goes wrong. So if it was to go wrong, you know. So what is the definition of a plugin? If you go to documentation, definition of a plugin is, quote, a plugin extends the build definition, most commonly by adding new settings. The new settings could be new tasks, end quote. So you probably, if you know what this means, then that's great. If you're a bit confused by what this means, we're going to get to it. And I'm using SBT plugins as a guiding theme of the talk, but really, when you look into it, explaining how to make a plugin, about 80% overlaps with the basic architecture of how SBT works. So we need to cover those. And the remaining 20% that doesn't overlap is basically knowing the DSL for writing plugins, which is, again, findable about enough, and plain Scala. Most of the plugin code you write is just plain Scala. It's nothing esoteric. So the main thing you need to know about SBT is that as it's unifying principle, the closest thing to a unifying principle is that in SBT everything is a setting. So if you think about object-oriented programming, everything is an object. In Unix, everything is a file. In functional programming, everything is a value. And in SBT, everything is a setting. So settings are what you see here. Is this big enough? No. Is this big enough? Yeah. Okay. It's too big? No. Okay. So these are all settings. I'm sure you've all seen them in build definitions. What you may not have noticed is that any tasks, such as, for example, compile, test, and so on, are also settings, which is a bit confusing. So you have, under the umbrella of setting, you have settings proper, such as these, static values, and task settings, so to speak, so something like that compile. And so for example, in this case, could I go and add my own setting here? So that a plugin adds settings, and settings could be tasks. So can I just add something here like my setting equals something? This doesn't compile. That's because SBT is statically checked, so any settings, a settings is a key value pair, and every key needs to have associated value. You need to define in advance what keys your build will accept. So if you do, so you have to say it in advance, lazy val my setting, which is a setting key of, let's call it long, and then you define it via this simple constructor. So now that we have this, if we try to, okay, this is probably not good enough either. Sorry, big enough either. Is it? Let's make it bigger. Big enough? Bit more. Okay.
Not too much.
Big enough?
Yeah.
So just like we can do show name of this project and we get log plugin, now we can do show my setting and we'll get this. So as as I said before, you have settings and you have tasks. They're both settings, and it's confusing. A setting is calculated only once. So if you made this system dot current time and you were to and you try to get this multiple times, you always get the same values because it's only calculated once. If you made this a task instead, you need to make this a task key. Then you're right.
In the string.
Thank you. Then here you're starting to get the results that you're expecting. So, okay, these were the basics. So let's actually try to write something useful. Let's try a useful task. So in this case, I thought I'd try to write a lines of code counter as a SBT plugin that might conceivably be useful to somebody. So let's call this LOC, lines of code. And now, since it's a task, we can write any, okay, first of all, we probably need unit. We don't want to return anything for this. We just print into screen. You can write any Scala code in here that returns the expected type. So, okay, 90% of the time, you probably want to interact in some way with your files contained in your project. You want to interact with the file system, read the files, or package them in some way. So how do you access the file system? Well, there's one way, which is the brutal way, the crude way, which, okay, it's just for illustration, but you can simply you can simply run process, part of the SBT API, say for example, and then a shell command. And if you run these, then you will get the results. So obviously you can do basic manipulation with shell commands, and that's a useful thing to know how to do it, but obviously that's not the cleanest way to do it. SBT, in fact, offers what's called the I/O library, which is simply an API for accessing the file system. And in here you can find all sorts of tools that you might need. You can find methods to list files, read and write them, delete them, even zip them, all sorts. Now, in the interest of time, we can't really write the whole lines of code plugin from scratch. We're going to do some copy and paste, but I'll go through it. It's inevitable. So there's nothing really too hard here. You take care of. Okay, first of all, we just not simply print in line. We want to print to some sort of log file. Streams, interesting, is just another setting of which you get the value of. Here is another side of the SBT file system API path to get a list of paths in your directory. Base directory is another setting, by the way. And then you have some usages of I/O list files, and then all you do. These few lines are just pure Scala. Nothing new really. And then you will print the results. So you have two calls to I/O here. It's handy enough. So if you wanted to test to see if it works, we will create some sort of Scala class. Well, I remove it because it doesn't actually remove detect multi-line comments because it's very simple. So I need to do it this way. And if we reloaded it, then we'll get this. So by now you're probably thinking that this is not really a plugin, it's just a custom task that we've defined. So, and that's true. So we need to package it as a plugin now. But there's nothing, this is exactly the same way as you would write it. So let's package it as a plugin. The packaging part doesn't really add any very profound, it doesn't really require any profound knowledge of SBT. So all you would do is you create package, in this case we'll call IO underscore, it's lock plugin. And in here we will create a lock plugin object. So once you have this, let's get rid of test. Once you have this, how do you make it into a plugin? You have to simply, oh, this has gone small again. You simply have to extend auto plugin, which is a base trait provider SBT. But if you want to have access to that, you need to add here the setting SBT plugin equals true, reasonably enough. And we reload the SBT SBT settings. Just downloading some stuff. Wonder why it has to download all this stuff. I practiced this talk loads of times before. For some reason, it's thrown it all away. Come on. Oh, no, it hasn't. No, that's fine. Now that we've done this, we just sort of copy and paste what we've done here, not quite. So there's different ways of defining a plugin. You can do it in different ways, simplest or perhaps common ways. First, you define an object within your object called auto import, I think. Is that right? Auto import, that's right. And not surprisingly, you put in there any values that you want imported by default. In this case, it's the definition of our block key, which needs to be defined before we define any of the code. Otherwise, SBT is not aware of it. And secondly, if you want to import any settings / tasks into your project in which you will use this plugin, in this auto plugin trait, you have to override this function called project setting. It's not the clearest API ever, and I think a lot of people concur on it. But it is what it is. So, override def, isn't it? This is just a list of settings you want to import. And here you could just copy and paste this. That's it. And yeah, this is inside auto import, so you can do. That's it. This is a plugin now, and it should work. So let's try to reload here. So we have a plugin defined containing the task that we defined earlier. What we do now is try to see if it works in an actual project. So we publish it so we can use it. If you do publish local, it will be published to our own local repository, which has succeeded. And again, in the interest of saving time, here's a canned project that would like to use our plugin. So this little project here, all it has is I have already taken care of in project / plugins.sbt, requiring my plugin, which I just defined. I have already taken care in build SBT to enable it. And I have already taken care of making a little file with some content so it can be counted. So, very small again. This is too big now. Why has it gone too big? You can't see the end. That's it. So, this is, we open SBT on the project that would like to use it. It will resolve it. See, it's resolving it. It's resolved. And if you type plugins in SBT, you can see that our plugin has been pulled in. It's here. And we can run it. And this is what we wanted at the beginning, and we got there. So if there were time, which there isn't, is very tight, I would probably go and show you some existing plugins online, just for confirmation that when you have a bigger plugin, bigger project like Scala format or OneJar or what have you, they really don't do things much differently. Most commonly, they have a big Scala, pure Scala core where they do all the work that they have to do, and they have a very thin front end in front of it, which is exactly like this, extending auto plugin, which then define its setting, which then call into the code that they're already written, which 99% is plain Scala, I'll probably say. So this is about it. So again, this is not cutting-edge technology. It's not something new, but I hope that the things that we'll have achieved is, again, bypass the reluctance that people that if you're like me, you would have not had the strong inclination to look into stuff like this. But I think it's extremely useful to know if the day comes where you have to do it. And if anyone having seen this has now had their apprehension about trying something like this removed, then I will consider myself happy with this talk. Just a final thing to mention, there isn't, settings and tasks is not the only way that you can add functionality to SBT. SBT also has the notion of a command, which is a completely different thing, and it goes completely outside of the build graph that is the core of the SBT architecture, and it is more powerful, but at the same time it allows you to do much more, in the sense that you can add setting, manipulate SBT in all sorts of ways, some of which probably are perhaps against the spirit. I would say that in most cases, doing things by using tasks and settings like this is sufficient. But if you're curious, read the documentation, because it's actually quite readable. So that's all there is time for. Thank you for listening, and have a good evening.